break with both kids. Um, which is also why we kind of strategically did this class for breakfast on a Sunday this hour, with the idea that, we're moving into a new week and that it's a great idea to get a lot of that breakfast prep done. And then it's just one last thing that you have to worry about. I do want to say a very happy birthday to my best friend, Virginia. Here's
Yay!
to you. Woo! I loved a good excuse to have a glass of wine with class. It's 5 o'clock in Ohio, so that counts. I'm gonna go with it. All right, and I think that's all I have to say. I do want to let you guys know the orders that I'm gonna do the recipes. So I'm gonna start with the muffin because it's gonna take the longest in the oven. So if you're baking your muffins, go ahead and get that oven preheated to 400. I will then move on to the granola and then the golden oatmeal, and I will finish the breakfast top. Let's move on to our muffin. So I did do some mise en place, which I know I talked to you guys a fair amount about that, especially because I do have these two kids underfoot most of the time. So it does really help to have all of my ingredients already measured out and ready to go. I still, even when I'm not on air, I use that trick where as soon as I use an ingredient, I move it to the side so that I know that I have measured all of the things that I need to measure. So I have my two types of flour. This recipe was originally from another friend's mom, and it called for all white flour. And I very easily just divided it in half. So it gets half the amount of white flour and half the amount of whole wheat flour. This is a very easy substitution that you can do with any recipe that you are currently making that calls for flour. Very simple to sub in half and half, both white and whole wheat flour. I don't recommend going over 50%. It does tend to change the texture of the muffin or baked product, whatever you're using. So just that 50-50 is always a good rule of thumb. And this recipe is also a little different because you are going to mix the sugars in with the flour. So I have both my white and brown sugar here as well. I'm going to add that to my bowl. And then I have my spices all measured out as well. So I've got cinnamon. The recipe we sent you guys originally said baking soda. That was a misprint. It is baking powder that we want you to put in this recipe. And I believe Heather sent that out to you guys. But just in case you didn't see that, it's baking powder. So I'm going to go ahead and add all of that into my flour as well.
Heather,
Now,
Katie, we have two questions.
Okay.
First, we want to know if we can sub with whole wheat pastry flour.
Sure.
I wouldn't see why not.
I'm going to say I don't see why not. Exactly. Pastry flour tends to be finer. Sometimes it has some cornstarch in it, but I wouldn't think that in this type of muffin recipe, you're going to see like a huge difference. So I'm going to say go for it.
And the second question is, why mix sugar with the dry?
Yes, so I am not really sure. This is one of the very few recipes that I've ever made that the sugars get mixed in with the dry, but it does certainly make it really simple. So I kind of have never argued with it. I make this muffin recipe, no joke, probably every other week, to the point where like I just have the whole thing memorized. I don't have to look at the recipe card anymore, which when you have a recipe that you're that loyal to that you don't have to read all the instructions and ingredients, it makes it so much easier to make. So I just have never tried it the other way. But I think some of it has to do with not having to, you don't have to worry about over mixing it by just adding it into the dry ingredients. And so now I'm actually going to use the whisk that I ultimately will be using to mix later to mix up my wet ingredients. I'm going to start with it here in my dry ingredients. So this way I can kind of break up the brown sugar and make sure that my spices are all incorporated well into this flour mixture. And then we'll do our liquids I always recommend that you add your wet ingredients to your dry ingredients, not the other way around. I just find that it's best, it comes out best that way. All right, so most of my brown sugar is worked into this. And now we'll do our, our wet. So I have a liquid measuring cup here. I already measured my 1/3 of a cup of water into it. And now I'm gonna go ahead and add my milk. This recipe also, a few of you that come often have heard my hack where I just add water to yogurt in place of milk. This recipe is definitely a recipe that I have done that trick for. So if milk is not something that's often in your house or you find that you're out of it, very easy to just water down yogurt until it's the consistency of milk and use it in place of milk in this recipe. Originally, this recipe called for just oil and milk. And so by adding that water, you just shave a few calories off of it where you're using a little bit less oil for your liquid. But ultimately, we need a whole cup of liquid. So sometimes I mix it up depending on my mood, my ratios of oil and milk or yogurt and water or whatever. It all comes out to a cup, and that's all that matters. And now I'm just gonna break my egg right into that liquid measuring cup. And then I'm gonna use that same whisk to break up my egg yolk and whisk this. I have already greased my muffin pan. I just used a little bit of canola oil to get my pans oiled. You can absolutely use muffin papers. I never seem to own them, and I never seem to remember to buy them. So I just deal with greasing it.
Katie, sorry.
Yeah,
Katie, do you have any other recommendations besides canola oil? I don't know if that
Oh,
works.
sure. I mean, you could use vegetable oil. You could use olive oil, as long as it's not extra virgin olive oil. Most olive oils are pretty neutral and are not going to, add a strong flavor to the muffin. And there was something I was about to say, but now I don't remember. We'll see. Maybe it'll come back to me.
Katie, how do you feel about silicone cupcake liners?
Oh, sure. Yep, I think they're fine. I think silicone, they work really well. I feel like these muffins are not especially like tender. So as far as popping them out, you shouldn't have any problem. I just have had this very old muffin for I know what I was going to say is that greasing muffin pans is a great job for kids. So that is some of the reason why I don't bother buying the papers, is that it gives my kids a job when they're here, other than just licking the bowl, their other favorite job. All right, I'm gonna show you guys now and this on my phone here. So I have my cut frozen bananas. This will actually be the first time I've ever done bananas. We've done blueberries in the past. I've done strawberries. I've even done like frozen pineapple. So there's a lot of options of fruits that you can put into this muffin. But I want to show you guys on the stove can here that I am not over mixing my muffins. And I'm even going to stop right about here, even though there's still some flour, because now I'm going to mix in my bananas. And it'll give me an opportunity to mix that last little bit. I think the recipe says like 1.5 cups of fruit. You could probably go up to 2. I personally don't think there's anything wrong with more fruit in these muffins. All right, so you'll see it's a pretty stiff dough, right? But the key is to not overmix. And this. And now I'm just gonna do, we call it scoop and scrape. So I got a spoonful, and I'm just gonna scrape it into the muffin pins. This recipe makes like a perfect normal sized muffin, exactly 12 of them. So, I often talk about how a lot of places where you buy muffins, whether it's the grocery store or like a coffee shop, that the muffins are the size of your head. Those are not a recommended serving size of a muffin. I like to tell people to think about like what their grandmother would have made, or like a great aunt or something, where they are maybe the size of a fist versus the size of your face.
Katie, can you tell us why there's a preference for frozen over fresh fruit?
Yeah, so if you use, so you could definitely use fresh fruit. There's no problem with that. I think the only real preference I would say is that when you do that final mix, it can get kind of mushed up in there, right? You'll like your blueberries will start to pop, or it'll kind of turn your batter like a pink color if you're using strawberries, or like a blue color. So using frozen ones just kind of helps keep them intact in the mixing process. But you absolutely can use fresh. Here in Louisiana, we're officially in strawberry season, and blueberry season is not far behind. Last year I went a little out of control and picked somewhere close to 7 gallons of blueberries, which I still have some frozen in my freezer because they are a delicacy, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and pop these in, and I'm gonna set my timer. I told my mom to remind me this time if I forget to set my timer. So I'm gonna start, with 20 minutes.
If using frozen berries, do you give them a quick rinse before adding them to the dough?
Do I? No. That sounds like a step that I don't want to deal with. Then I would have to dirty something to put the frozen berries in. So I like to make sure I'm not doing any extra steps than what is required. And yeah, if anything, you're going to kind of defrost it some, I would think, if you did that. And then again, you're going to see that kind of like bleeding into your muffin batter. Okay, let's make some granola. So let me look at my granola recipe here. I have, this one is actually one of Amber and her partner Matt's. And we picked this one because it does do like a good job clumping, right? Which is, I feel like, what we're more used to when we tend to buy granola at the grocery store, is that it's kind of in these like lumps or chunks, versus like very separate pieces of the oatmeal. So I thought it would be exciting to show you guys that. Excuse me, I just have whole old-fashioned oats that are gonna go into my bowl. I have some coconut flakes here. These are, let me actually get you guys the bag to show you these. These are these like unsweetened coconut flakes. I really do love these, and I use them in a lot of different cookies or granolas. The flakes can be kind of big, so I do tend to cut them a little bit so that you get a more balanced bite. So I try to make them a little bit closer to the size of the kernel of oatmeal. And then I've got some chopped pecans, but the recipe suggested that you also could add some seeds to it. And so I did that. I added about a tablespoon of sesame seeds and a tablespoon of flax seeds. So that is gonna go right into this bowl. And now I have in this bowl here, I have the oil and the vanilla, but I don't have maple syrup because, as you can see, I do not like go shopping just for these classes. I make sure I use like what I have, because I also think these are great like teaching moments to show you guys what I substitute out in lieu of buying maple syrup. Maple syrup's really expensive. My kids like it too much, and so I try not to have so much of it in the house. But instead, as a true Louisiana gal now, I have some cane syrup that I think we got from Best Stop in like Scott, Louisiana. So I'm going to use that in lieu of my maple syrup. But cane syrup is thick, kind of like molasses. So it calls for 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. So I'm going to add about 1.5 tablespoons and then add a little bit of water so that I have a more similar consistency of the maple syrup. And so we're mixing all of our liquids together, and then our spices we're going to mix into this liquid, and then we're going to coat our oats with that. And then my oven is a little high for this granola. So although I'm going to mix it all together, I am just going to wait a minute before I put it in the oven so that I don't burn it. So with granola, I know, like, there's definitely the tendency just to drink, eat it with milk like cereal. But we would definitely encourage folks to eat it with yogurt and add maybe some fresh fruit to it to make a very complete breakfast. That's more on the like leaner side. We definitely encourage more yogurt and kefir than milk because the Mediterranean diet really it's one of the categories where it suggests a lesser amount than what most Americans consume. So I believe that it's up to a cup a day. And that's all of your dairy. So I do try to be really judicious about where I work that cup of dairy into my diet. I don't love milk as much as I love cheese and ice cream. So I kind of pick my battles of which one I'm going to go with there. But another great thing that I love granola for is to actually put on top of ice cream. It adds a really nice crunch. It adds some fiber to a non-fibrous dessert. So it's a nice way to give some texture, but also a little more nutrition to a dessert. It's also just great as like a midday snack. If your granola, if you don't eat it in enough time and it kind of loses its crunch, you can easily put it back on the sheet tray and just bake it in a low oven, and it will help eliminate that moisture and bring you back your crunchiness. But usually, I mean, this is not a huge amount that we're making. And if you keep it in a good airtight container or a Ziploc bag, you should be okay.
Katie, with this, I know we made the sister version of this at the holidays gifts, the almond pepita granola. And I got to tell you, I still had it on, I made a batch of each for that class, and I had it on my counter until February when we finished it, and it kept its crunch the whole time.
That's awesome. That's good to know. And I wonder if, some of that might be because of the clumping aspect of this one, that it's like takes a little bit longer for it to penetrate, but it's so humid here. Sometimes I think depending on how your house is, like if you're like an open window type of person or like a closed window, things can go stale so much faster, but it's nice to know that that was like 2.5 months then, huh?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I definitely didn't need 4 quarts of it, I think.
Okay. Yeah. All right, so I've got my mixture here of all my liquids, my oil, and I also have all my spices. I did add that optional cayenne pepper because I do like when you do that little bit of spicy with, sweet stuff. It's like savory and sweet. And then the one ingredient that we are leaving out until the very end is our dried cherries. So we just don't want them to get really dried out. Sometimes it can make dried fruit really hard to eat. And I'll show you guys. I'm going to stir this. I'm going to make sure that I have coated every single piece of my oatmeal here because you really don't want just plain oatmeal. You want it all to have the flavor. And that is why we mixed all of our liquids together and our spices, is that it's just going to really help you not have like clumps of anything.
All right, Katie, we got 2 more questions.
Okay, good, hit me.
Okay, first question. What's a good substitute for coconut?
Oh, let's see. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if there is. Like, can you think of something? I mean, I feel like the coconut is only in there for like a little bit more flavor. So you could add something like a little bit of almond extract. That would give like a very defined flavor, similar to coconut. Because I don't know that it's anything textural that the coconut's doing, right? It's probably pretty similar to the granola, the oatmeal itself. Trying to think of anything else that would.
You definitely could omit it from this recipe, but she mentions that she loves coconut, but her family doesn't. What I personally would do in that situation is just toast up some coconut on the side and put a little bit on my portion of it.
Yeah. Or even like, so pretend like this bowl here doesn't have coconut in it. So it has everything but the coconut all mixed in. Put half on half of the sheet tray and then mix your coconut into the second half and put that on the other half. I mean, that would be pretty easy because you do kind of want the coating on it, you know? But you probably could also add it at the end when we add the cherries to keep it separate.
And there's definitely enough moisture in there, as Elaine's mentioning, that you could add more nuts or more dried fruit or to that. The other question is back to the muffin recipe.
Okay.
Quote, I normally use the 6 muffin pan because I can use the toaster oven to bake it and it'll last me for a work week. How would you suggest I adjust the recipe so I can keep a whole egg for 6 muffins?
Well, you know what I would do is just bake it. Can you do it in 2 rounds in the toaster oven and then freeze half of them? Because this is the other great thing about this recipe is that it freezes really well. And so that's what I usually do is I freeze about 6 of them. Because I think if I heard you right, it's a 6 pan muffin. Yes. So just do 6, pop the batter in the refrigerator while those 6 are baking, and then bake it again if you've got the time.
With this batter being so dry, do you think that you could do similar to your cookie technique and like roll in some paper and freeze half of it?
That is a great question. I've never tried it, so I just can't say 100%. I mean, yeah, I really don't know. I would think that in order to do that, you'd really need like a very heavy duty, like quick freezing freezer versus what most of us have at home. As far as Virginia's kids are like battling it out with their stuffed animals there. Yeah, that I think I worry that like the baking powder would ultimately continue, being activated, and that when you baked them, once you defrosted them, that they wouldn't really puff up. So if it was me and I was just wanted to do 6 at a time, you could either just cut the recipe in half and just leave the whole egg. And I don't think it's going to make a huge difference to just do a whole egg with the half recipe.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Okay, so I'm gonna spread this out. I do have this Silpat in lieu of parchment paper, but you definitely want to put something down on your tray so that you don't have stuff sticking to it. And I'm just gonna spread an even layer. And because I want these to kind of stick together, I'm not gonna spread it out over my entire pan because otherwise you're not gonna get any of them clumping together. We'll kind of keep it in this interior rectangle here.
All right, Katie, another question. What do you do to the muffins after unthawing?
So I either just eat them or we throw them in the toaster oven for a toast round, and they are like fresh baked muffins at that point. Yeah. But often I'll defrost them overnight in the toaster oven and my kids will eat them for breakfast and they don't complain. So it can't be that bad. But my kids also at this point, like they eat, they're not very picky eaters, luckily. All right, I just have to wash my bowl out. Or actually, no, I don't. I think I'm done with that bowl. I think we're good. All right, let's talk golden oatmeal. And actually, I'm going to turn my muffins too. Because we've only got about 7 minutes left. I think they take about 20 to 25 minutes. I do try to rotate halfway through. My oven's a little wonky, so I never really trust it. All right, so this is a quart container, like from a carry-out restaurant, but it also measures 4 cups of liquid really well. So I have just a little less than 2 cups of milk, but I don't care. So I'm going to fill it up the rest of the way to get me 4 cups of liquid to make the golden oatmeal. Now, this recipe definitely works with the oatmeal you want to. So said the recipe on the back of your oatmeal bag or box or whatever it is, trust it. If whatever liquid it says to whatever amount of oats, most companies spend millions of dollars a year making sure that the recipe that's on the back of their bag of oatmeal or rice or whatever is going to be a very good ratio, a proper one. So, we said 4 cups to 1 cup, but if you're working with quick oats, you're going to need less liquid. If you're working with something like steel cut oats, you might need more liquid. So just trust whatever's on the back of your container. And then we'll do this. The rest of it we'll do together. So I'm going to get the fire going under it. It just gets a little bit of salt and a spatula. So I'm going to bring this milk and water up to almost a simmer. To be honest, the only reason there's an actual recipe is because when I do classes like this, I have to submit a recipe. When I make this for my kids, I don't measure any of this. I pour what almost looks like 4 or 5 cups of liquid. I just dump right out of the container. You kind of get an eye for it. So I feel like oatmeal is not something that you should be stressing too hard over, like exact measurements. But I do really love this oatmeal recipe, and my kids especially love this oatmeal recipe. And by adding the vanilla and the cinnamon, it just gives a very rounded flavor. I mean, as you can see, we don't have any sweetener added to our to this recipe, but there's something about cinnamon and vanilla that we all connect with, like cakes and cookies and desserts and sweet things, that sometimes when you eat them together, even if there's nothing sweet in them, it gives this idea of sweetness. And then my son is obsessed with raisins, so he often gets raisins on top of his oatmeal. And then my daughter is really kind of random in her fruit addiction, so just depending on whatever she loves that week. But bananas, strawberries, apples, pineapple. So I mean, you can add any sort of fruit to the top of this. But the real, I think, amazing ingredient in this recipe is the turmeric. And the turmeric is what gives it this beautiful, bright yellow, golden color. Oatmeal, I would have to say, I don't think is the most appetizing color on its own, right? It's kind of gray, tan color. But by adding this turmeric to it, it just gives it a really more beautiful color. Turmeric is in the same family as ginger, so it grows underground. It has that kind of a very similar flavor that ginger has, but it also is a really good anti-inflammatory. So I do love incorporating it into things like oatmeal or rice. I do tend to put fresh turmeric in my smoothies, and it gives added again, like anti-inflammatory properties to my green smoothies in the morning. It will stain. I do know we made a chicken dish, I think one time with some turmeric in it. So just beware of your clothes, or if whatever cutting board you might be around, it can, that yellow color also, it tends to stick. All right, so my oats, or my liquid is warm enough. So I'm gonna go ahead and add my oatmeal to that. And we're gonna let that go. This is nothing exciting. I'm just cooking oatmeal. I'm sure all of you can do that. I'm just gonna give it a few stirs to make sure that, like, I don't have anything stuck to the bottom. But this is absolutely a dish that, or a pot that I tend to neglect. And again, as far as the recipe, it doesn't say like, then forget about it, which is usually what I tend to do. And then I come back and I'm like, oh, the oatmeal's done. I think the point being is that there's a lot of room for error, and oatmeal is very forgiving. So don't stress about it too much, because at the end, what we're ultimately going to do is adjust for consistency. So if it comes out really tight, we can just add a little bit of liquid. Now, as far as when I make this oatmeal, I do make a pretty big batch of it, usually about a double this version. And the way that I serve it to my kids is that I'll either leave it in the toaster oven overnight so that it's room temperature for them in the morning, or I will put a little bit of water in a pot and I'll add the cold oatmeal to that pot. So by adding that little bit of water, it means the oatmeal is not going to stick to the bottom of my pan when I'm reheating it, but it also is going to help kind of loosen it up, right? You know how cold oatmeal really gets like, it like seizes and gets.
All right, so I think Katie paused for a second. She'll jump back in. In the meantime, because sometimes her Wi-Fi does that, as it happens to everyone around here. I'm sure that's a thing that happens uh, across the country. Is we did have a couple questions in the chat. So in our experience, there is no real stain on the turmeric. As far as we haven't seen anyone that's had a problem with that. Additionally, I haven't really heard anyone having a problem with turmeric as far as changing texture. I'd imagine it's because if there's a lot more of it, I also find that is known to make things a little gritty. So what we do is we recommend adding it to a fat soluble liquid. Spices are fat soluble. So if we can add our turmeric to something like this milk, then it'll be able to incorporate a little bit more, and then it won't have a problem with getting that grittiness, which I think is what you mean, Jay. I think. I know that happens a lot when I make a curry in a rush and I don't get the fat soluble spices fully combined. So I imagine when she comes back on, her oatmeal should be somewhere around a boil. I guess it's a good point in time to check in with everyone and see if there are anyone cooking along. I think I see a lot of movement in some kitchens. Let me see if there's anyone. Oh, Megan's cooking along. Perfect. Are you able to keep up on this pace? Is Katie doing good? All right. Excellent. I think Nicole is cooking along. Lena's making the muffins. Hopefully Katie was able to answer your question a decent amount with that egg situation. Excellent. I think Jolene's cooking along as well, and Nancy. I think this might be one of our bigger amount of cooking along that's happened. Oh, Nicole, it's very important to have a good sous chefs in the kitchen. So I'm so glad that your husband and daughter are able to cook along. Um, perfect. Oh, Megan says her muffins are done. So if anyone's cooking along, yours might also be done. So you might want to take a look at those. Thank you for the pro tip, Megan. Um, Elaine asking about wondering if we have any ideas for adapting these recipes for an air fryer. I got to be honest, I don't know anything about air fryers. I don't own one. We have one at the kitchen, at the Goldring Center that we've been wanting to use. So maybe that's something that we can try to work on. A lot of people ask us a lot of questions about the air fryers, and I've heard good things about them. I think I think Katie's usually in the standpoint of that's just another thing that she has to wash, which I completely that's my camp as well. I'm least amount of effort as possible is always my goal. Oh, perfect. It looks like we got Katie back. Thank you all for that my like tolerating my awkwardness to keep that going.
Okay. All right. So let's see. We're back. All right. Our oatmeal is simmering. So I am going to turn that down to low. And I'm just giving it a few stirs here.
All right, Katie, we have a lot of muffins that we pulled out of the oven while you were gone.
Oh, nice. I know. I was going to say my muffins just timer just went off as well. I'm going to give them. I have one more minute. I'm just going to give them one more minute. But I'm so happy that all the other muffins are coming out. This one really is such a beloved muffin recipe for me that I love sharing it with everyone. All right, and we have our tacos left. And once I pull these out, I'm gonna go ahead and turn my oven down so I can add the.
Katie, do we wait until after the oatmeal finishes simmering to add the spices?
Yes, exactly. I think that's what everything froze up. So yeah, so the vanilla and the turmeric and the cinnamon, we save for the very end because if you added them now, they would kind of cook out. And so we save it for the very end so that that vanilla flavor is very forward on the taste of it. All right, let's see. All right, I think these look pretty good too. Banana muffins seem to be cooked. I'm going to go ahead and put my granola in. So 15 minutes on that granola recipe. The fruit is still out. So we'll add that at the last minute as well. Okay, so the breakfast taco is going to be our last demo for you guys. This is one of my favorite breakfasts to teach because I think people tend to overcomplicate breakfast a little bit, and that during the week is not the time to have an overly complicated breakfast. And so a really simple breakfast taco is a great way to get you out the door with a whole grain, a protein, and a dairy. And then if you like have something extra in your fridge that you can throw in, like an avocado or some extra black beans, super simple to just mix those in with the eggs. But I've got I'm going to do just 2 eggs for you guys. I know the recipe called for 4, but I don't think it's going to change how I cook anything if I show you 2 eggs versus 4. So I'm just going to go ahead and crack my eggs into a bowl. And then I've got my Trader Joe's chunky salsa. So that's what I'll be using. I think at the restaurant, we often use like Pace. What's our favorite brand, Amber, you remember?
Yeah, we were using Pace because they have a no sodium mild salsa.
Okay. So let's see what this one's got. So for 2 tablespoons, this one has 180 milligrams of sodium. But
That's
for our 2, is it good?
Mhm.
All right, great. That was going to be my next question: is what were your thoughts on that? So I'm going to put 1 scoop of the salsa just right in the bowl with my eggs. This is going to do 2 things. It's going to mean that you're not putting something cold on top of something warm. So when it comes time to eat your tacos, you're going to have everything will be a universal temperature. It also is going to add a little bit of liquid to your eggs, which means that you're not going to have like really dried out eggs, right? They're going to have a little bonus moisture added to them. Oh, this thing's really rolling now.
Katie, while you're doing your mixing of the eggs, can we see a better angle on it?
Oh yes, for sure. Let's see. You guys want this one?
Oh, there you go.
So I just used this same little baby whisk I've been using all day. Nothing too complicated. We're just whisking it with the salsa. And, you know, I'm going to be honest. I think I may have written this oatmeal recipe just slightly under that. I think it needs 2 cups of oats. Oops. So I'm going to add some more oats. And I'm not going to measure them. I'm going to show you guys just what I normally do, which is like just dump it in. But I thought it seemed a little liquidy at first. And this seems a little bit better. So if you're making this recipe, I think, what did it say? It was like 4 cups of, is anybody else actually making it?
Yeah, you have 4 cups of liquid to 1 cup of oat.
Yeah, that's too much. So I'm going to say 2 cups, 2 cups of oats for 4 cups of liquid.
We do have a note that that's about what the box of Quaker Oats says.
Yes. Oh, so is that what Quaker Oats says too? Is 1 cup to 4 cups of liquid?
They're doing a 2-to-1 ratio.
They do a 2-to-1. Okay, yes, that makes a lot more sense. But again, remember what I said, oatmeal's very forgiving. So what I'll do probably with this one is that once it looks thick enough, I'm just going to put a lid on it and let it sit for a little bit. That way I can have steam help cook the rest of that oatmeal, since some of it, obviously some of the liquid has already like evaporated in the simmering. But I think it'll be fine. Try to do this without like catching my phone on fire. I'm gonna move the oats back. I'm gonna move the iron front. I believe our recipe calls for like a little bit of pan spray or using a nonstick pan. I personally love my cast iron skillet, as we talk about often in my classes. And so I don't add anything to the pan. I am going to get this pan pretty hot, and my eggs are going to cook pretty fast. I also have some of these garlic chives that I'm just going to add right into mine. So some other optional things we talked about, like cilantro, or you could easily like add some chopped spinach if you wanted to, because that cooks really fast. Tomatoes, peppers, anything that you like on go, or if you just if you have something in your fridge that's already cut or already cooked, like zucchini or squash, those could easily be mixed into this too. Roasted red peppers. So I happen to have some of these garlic chives from the River Queen Greens that I picked up yesterday. Yeah, so see, this is what I'm looking for in my oatmeal. Like it's getting thick. right? It's not quite as runny as it had looked before. All right, and I'm gonna let that pan get a little bit hotter. Like when I add my eggs, they're gonna actually almost look like they're like boiling. They're gonna roll a little bit. I already have my cheese pre-shredded that I'm gonna put on top of my cooked eggs that will melt immediately. And then I'm definitely gonna show you guys the trick of grilling the tortillas for a little bonus flavor. So it'll give that little grilled flavor to the egg taco, which is, since it's already such a simple recipe, to add that grilled flavor is going to enhance the taste of it. So I just am like kind of pushing it from the sides to the middle to get my eggs cooked. I'm going to rotate my granola. I'm right at that halfway point. I do have, my eggs are sticking like a little bit. So when it comes time to clean this, all I'm going to do is put a little bit of water in this skillet and turn it and put it on the stove and let it cook. And literally it'll all just wipe right out. All right, so I'm going to stop it right there. It's a little loose, but because I'm going to let it stay in the pan and melt the cheese on top, that last little bit of cooking will happen that way. Now, you definitely could put the cheese in the taco if you wanted to, but my children, who you can see is like my #1 concern for breakfast, because I drink smoothies for breakfast, so they're the ones that actually get to eat the food. They want to see that cheese. They don't believe me if it's mixed in with the eggs. And they probably have every right. I do trick them a fair amount. Okay, so I am going to put a lid on this oatmeal. You guys see where we're at here? It's like a little congealed, but there's still some liquid in it. I'm just gonna let it steam. I do this often with my grits too, that I may stop them a little bit early and just put a lid on them because I would much rather like maybe invest an extra like 10 minutes on the cooking of my grits in the steaming process than scorching my pan. Which I have a bad habit of doing. Okay, so those are my eggs. I'm just gonna set those aside and I'm gonna use this exact same burner to cook my tortilla. Now, had I not just made the egg on it, I would give it a minute for that metal to get hot, but it's already hot. So I'm just gonna put my tortilla right on top of it. And because you want it to get hot so the tortilla doesn't stick to it. You could also do this in a cast iron skillet or a dry, like aluminum skillet. It's not good to do non-stick pans with nothing in them. So I don't recommend warming up your tortillas in a non-stick pan. But it's kind of a good sign when they catch on fire a little bit, because that's when you know you're getting that good little char. Can you see this char that we got here on the edge? It's going to make a little crispiness to it, but it also is just going to give it that flavor of a grill. And we associate meat with the flavor of grilled things. So when you're serving something that doesn't have any meat in it, it does really help to have this kind of grilled. It's like when you add smoke flavor to things, it also gives you this idea of we always eat corn shell tortillas at the Goldring Center. It's considered a whole grain because it's made with corn. I often tell people that to make that transition from using all white flours to using yellow corn flour tortillas is that you kind of start with half and half. So you get one white shell taco and you get one corn shell taco. And then you slowly kind of work yourself away from the white shell tacos. I still love white shell tacos. I still eat them, but I don't eat them every single time I make tacos. And we make a lot of tacos in my house. And so knowing that it is a pleasure, but not a requirement is nice. All right, I'm gonna show you guys. So here's what my eggs look like, all melty, cheesy, delicious. Do this like here. All right, here's my plate with my taco shells. And then I'm just gonna split my egg. And what I do, again, because I'm always feeding my children, is I do it a little bit more like a quesadilla. So I'm gonna fold it in half. Like this. And I kind of just give it a good press. And that way that cheese, it sticks on there and it's a little bit easier to eat. So, voila, right? It looks really yummy. All right, let's see how our oatmeal's doing. So I'm gonna do the golden oatmeal now. So even though I'm still steaming it, because I'm not cooking it on the burner, I'm okay with going ahead and adding the turmeric and the vanilla and the cinnamon. So let's see what I suggested for this. A teaspoon of each. Easy peasy.
Now, Katie, these tacos you can freeze and, right? Isn't that something we see in class? You can foil them and then freeze them and then pop them in the toaster.
I am sure that you could, but I have to say, I wouldn't recommend it. How long did it take me to make that taco?
No time.
4 minutes, you think? Maybe 5? I think it would take longer to have to defrost a frozen taco than it would take just to make the thing.
Probably.
And so that's one reason, that's why I like to show the taco. I mean, I feel like a lot of what I've shown today, like, is going to last a week in your refrigerator, or you can freeze it. But the taco, I feel like, is a good example of a very satisfying, filling, nutritious breakfast that takes 5 minutes. And you get 2 tacos is a serving. I think our recipe called for 4, but 2 tacos is only 340 calories. And you're going to get 7 grams of dietary fiber and 21 grams of protein. And so that combination of fat, fiber, and protein is what's going to help you feel full longer.
And that includes the calories that would be with the black beans, green onion, avocado, cilantro, all those options. Now, Katie.
Oh, that's what that one is with all the options. Okay.
All those things in there.
Yeah.
Now, so the question is,
okay,
for the bean part of the tacos, if you use the can of black beans, do you drain it and then dry the beans, or how do you incorporate it?
So I would definitely drain them, because that liquid that they're in, it's like kind of viscousy, right? It's not very appetizing. So I would definitely drain them. I don't know if I'd go through the struggle of drying them. I mean, you're adding them to a liquid thing. I would, make sure that you use like a slotted spoon, or if you're rinsing them, you can just get it straight out of the colander. But yeah, and I really think maybe a tablespoon, maybe 2, like, you don't have to go crazy. The real ingredient in this recipe is the eggs. So the beans are just going to be like a nice little accompaniment. You also could kind of like mash up the beans and smear them onto the taco shell if you wanted to. All right, so here's the turmeric that I'm going to add. And then we'll do this last, this little bit of cinnamon. And then you guys are going to get to see it turn into this like beautiful, it already smells so good. I mean, some of that's the granola, but like the minute the cinnamon and the vanilla kind of enter the oatmeal. It's such a nice. And then I always really get in the corners because you don't want the whole point is that everything has the turmeric in it. You don't want like a plain lump hiding in there. All right, hopefully, I mean, does it travel in the realm of a cell phone video? Can you tell the goldenness of it?
Yeah, it almost looks like your eggs from here.
All right. Okay. And here is granola. So I'm just going to sprinkle these, whoops. Let's set that down. I'm going to sprinkle these cherries right on top, and then we're going to let it cool, and it'll be, they cools in the clumps. There we go. You certainly could like cut these cherries, I think, if you wanted to, but I left them whole. All right, guys. So, I mean, this is breakfast for like 16 people that I just made in 1 hour. Easy peasy. I do have a green smoothie that I could show you guys if you're interested. We're right at that 1 hour mark, which is what we really, shoot for. Would you guys like to see a green smoothie?
You were getting head nods. Yes.
Let's do it.
I'm adding the link to our Make Your Own Smoothie handout that gives you recommendations of the basic formula for Smoothie 101. And then Katie will make a version of that.
Yes, well, because I don't follow anybody's rules. So I just make smoothies. The most important thing to me in a smoothie is greens. My favorite greens to use are collard greens because I think they're really mild versus kale, which I think tends to can have a stronger flavor. I also have this weird thing where sometimes kale, the next day, it tastes a little garlicky. I've never quite figured that one out, but regardless, it's what it does for me. And when I make smoothies, I make enough for 4 days. So I'll show you guys. I've already got one in here. So this will be my smoothie for the next 2 days, at least. So if you are the type of person who really wants like a frozen kind of milkshakey consistency, then you're just going to want to make enough of a smoothie to serve you that 1 day. But if you're okay with just a refrigerator cold smoothie, then I recommend what I'm going to show you here. So I'm going to say I have about 2 cups of greens here. And it's just the top. I cooked some, this is chard, which they do, there's like regular Swiss chard, which is just green with white stems. And then there's beautiful rainbow chard. I do love doing it with rainbow chard because anytime you can incorporate those extra reds and yellows into your diet or your smoothie, you can also use, like the sky is the limit. You can use romaine lettuce, you can use spinach, kale, collard greens, chard, trying to think of what else. That might be the bulk of your leafy greens. Oh, I've used Napa cabbage, which was kind of just because I had to. I had just an insane amount of Napa cabbage from the CSA that I get produce from every week. And I thought, let's see what happens with Napa cabbage in my smoothie. And it was fine. I couldn't even tell that that's what it was. Okay, now let's see. Okay, so I compulsively collect frozen fruit. So I'll show you some examples. I have obviously just like some overripe bananas that I have, I just buy like a ton of bananas, and then once they go overripe, they go into my smoothie bag. I have some strawberries that were getting kind of gross. They still have the green tops on them because if we're already making a green smoothie, that little bit of green is not going to be a problem. I have other berries. This looks like peach, cherries, raspberries, blueberries. I tend to just buy like bags of mixed fruit whenever I'm at Trader Joe's, and then I just dump them all into my smoothie bag here. So let's say, I'm gonna say if I did 2 cups of greens, I'm probably gonna do like 2 to 3 cups of fruit. And then my real secret ingredient, my favorite thing in the world to add, beets. So you can see that this is just a whole beet. It still has some of the beet like stem on it. I just throw it in this bag here. I also had like some bits of carrot that I had cut up or something. I don't know, that I fed my kids, I'm sure. So I'm gonna throw some carrots in there. Normally this bag has fresh ginger and turmeric, but I think I am all out of those officially, which means I'll need to buy some more. The CSA that I go through, River Queen Greens, they sell turmeric and like fresh turmeric and fresh ginger, which you can also buy at stores like Whole Foods or Trader Joe's. And I bring them home, I wash them, I cut them into, you know, like blueberry sized pieces, and then I add them to this bag to be added to my smoothies.
I can absolutely understand, Katie, now why you refer to your smoothies lovingly as compost smoothies. I've
Yes.
never realized that you have the equivalent of a trader bag in your freezer,
Yes.
which
It's
is
so
very adventurous.
true.
Depending on what portion, as long as you do about 2 cups each, fruit and vegetable, you know, Katie's got a very complex uh, threshold of fun vegetables. So don't get intimidated if this is not your speed yet. And Sheila wants to know if your beets were roasted. I think they were raw.
No, they're raw. Yep, they're raw. And this one was really small, so I just left it whole. But some of the other ones in my bag, I go ahead and cut up. I don't peel them. I wash them very well. I cut them, you know, again, I'm looking for like you know, this size of order, a blueberry or like a hunk of pineapple, right? I do have a Vitamix, so even though all of this stuff is frozen, it will blend up very easily. I will mute my microphone when I start this. Now, the other big thing about smoothies that took me a long time to learn is that I do not like dairy in my smoothies. So I don't put milk, I don't put yogurt, and I don't put any sort of like milk substitute. I just use water. Water makes me happy. And this is another reason of why I love like talking about the green smoothies and really encouraging people to get on board with the green smoothies, is because most of us do not drink enough water. I went a little overboard on that one in the day. So I usually get it to about halfway with water. So here we are, so it's a little over half, but I think that's fine. But most of us don't get enough water. We definitely aren't getting enough like fruits and vegetables for the most part. And this takes care of all of those things to incorporate into our daily life. Okay, I'm gonna mute my camera, but I will show you guys my blender here. I'm gonna mute my thing. I think, yep.
I do see a question while that's blending about cleaning. How do you clean your beets? With any of the products that Katie's putting in that bag beforehand, she's rinsing them off. Generally speaking, beets are very similar to potatoes. We're just gonna give them a little extra thumb love on there to rub off the extra dirt, or you use a scrubby on like, you know, those potato scrubbers on there. But for the most part, everything we're doing is just rinsing our produce and then she's throwing in that bag. And based upon the ice chunks that she had in that bag, she's not drying off that produce before it throws in there. She's letting that ice stay on there. Also, that texture is excellent. Yes, a regular blender will be okay to cut up the things that are like uncooked beets. You just you don't need a fancy blender for it. You just want to make sure that if you are doing something that much frozen on it, that you'd want to include extra liquid just to compensate. No, when she's using all this added fruit, she doesn't need to add ice. But it's very similar to that as far as like you just want to cut a little bit smaller and add a little extra liquid if you're doing a standardized blender.
Yes, this is true. And I also, one thing that I talk about, or that I did with mine, that I try to encourage people is that when you put this stuff in the blender, like I let it go on low for a good bit until I feel like it has become a like kind of harmonious, even if it's still chunky, it's still like a moving in a unified manner. And then I start ramping up the speed on my blender, because then you really start to break down all of those bits and pieces so that you don't have like a lumpy smoothie. Another hack that a dear friend of mine that introduced me to green smoothies, Jody Brown, is that a lot of blenders like Oster and Kenmore, where the bottom screws off. Well, it screws on to one of these jelly jars exactly. And so velocity is often what you're missing in a larger blender that doesn't have as a strong of a motor as like as a Vitamix. And so that's why you'll see now a lot of them sell those like smoothie cups. It's all about velocity. And so if you use one of these jars and you can put it would be smaller, obviously, but you put your greens, your vegetables, your little bit of water, you screw it on top and then flip and put it on that blender base and it will blend in this jar. And then you can unscrew it and just drink right from it. But you'll see it made this like great purple color thanks to the beets and the blueberries and other berries that are in there. I have tricked every child I have ever taught into drinking green smoothies. My advice is to just start slow, like put a few pieces of kale in there or mix, lettuce mix. So you can start really small and then just kind of slowly ramp up until I feel like in a way too, you start to appreciate the vegetal taste to it and not just the fruitness of it. There is definitely a balance that you are looking for. But like those carrots and those strawberry tops and like you don't taste it, but your body gets all of the nutrients. And often those things are what you would have thrown away. So I love finding uses for produce that, whether it's saving for vegetable stock or saving for my smoothies, that I don't feel like I have thrown away food. I think that's it. We did it. Yay! Thank you for joining us. It was so nice to see all of you. And I think Amber's going to tell us about our next class. Did Heather talk to you about that one, Amber?
Yes, so I heard a bit about the next two classes, which we're really excited about. Sorry, my multitasking is a little bit subpar. I was trying to respond to a message from Elaine asking about spinach. So I'm just going to mention it quickly out loud because I'm better at it. So the thought with raw greens, she asked about she heard that spinach can be problematic to be eaten raw. The thought is that with some greens, like spinach, that it's just less bioavailable, so your body's less able to absorb all the nutrients in it if it's raw. In this case, it's such a small amount of difference in bioavailability that it's not something at the Goldring Center that we're concerned with. And we'd never discourage somebody from eating greens raw or cooked.
Well, I think too, I mean, certainly there's a lot of salads that have been recalled recently, like romaine and like some lettuce
Mhm.
mixes. So, in that sense, I really just encourage you to hit your local farmers market, where I think the possibility of that happening is extremely, extremely rare, because they are not really coming from very large farms, right? They're usually much smaller operations. So, I think that's another way to avoid the risk of, getting a foodborne illness.
Right. Okay, so for the next class, our next one is Wednesday, April 28th at 5:30 p.m. Katie has a seafood menu planned up, followed by a couple weeks after that, we have a class on, I think you're making risotto and scallops, right? And that
Yes.
second one, I'm trying to pull that date up.
Yeah, I think that's the second one that we're gonna do. So we're gonna try to do like we're gonna do pickled shrimp for the first fish class and a fish in papillote, which is a technique of cooking fish in parchment paper. And then for our next class, we'll be doing scallops and risotto. Fancy's favorite.
Perfect. So, yeah, those two classes are both classes that we created the menu based upon the feedback that we're getting from y'all. So, please, as when Heather sends out the email with this link to the class and says, hey, there's anything you'd like to see, let us know. We are listening and we're reading those and we're actually adding them to the agenda because of it. So that class on Wednesday the 28th at 5:30 is 5:30 Central. So I don't know what that is specific behind us.
Track two, so it would be 3:30.
All right, that's the answer on that, Jay. And then, as always, Heather will send that link in the follow up email, including this link for the upcoming classes, and they're all available on Eventbrite right now. So you can sign up for those. I'll drop those into the chat box right now for anyone that's lingering.
Yeah, and I did see in the chat here about if the greens can be frozen, and they totally can. And I often do that, just like I froze that strawberry and those bits of carrots. Like if I see my greens are starting to look a little sad and are getting a little old in my fridge, I will totally just cut them into some smaller pieces and throw it in that bag. I had some random pieces of collard greens in that bag of fruit that I was digging to put into my smoothie. So you can absolutely freeze them. You don't have to do anything to them, like just wash them well, because then you can just take it straight from the freezer into your blender.
Absolutely. All right. The next class link is in the chat. If anyone has any questions, feel free to hang back and ask us. If not, we hope you have a great night and enjoy all of your tasty dishes. And if anyone makes it and wants to send us pictures, we're always happy to get those.
Yeah. All right, excellent. Well, thank you guys all for joining in.